chronic inflammation and weight gain. What does that have to do with weight gain? And what is chronic inflammation anyway? Inflammation, there's two types actually. There's acute inflammation and there's chronic inflammation. So acute inflammation is just a response that our body goes through in response to a problem or something that's kind of damaging it, and it's trying to repair it. So that process is inflammation. So acute is going to be something like where you got a cut on your knee, for example, or some kind of infection, and it takes a short term for that problem to get fixed. However, with chronic inflammation, that process takes longer and it turns into a drawn out situation, which then can then lead to problems with damage to healthy organs in the body, healthy organs and tissues. It causes problems. What happens with inflammation is that, especially when there's excess fat, because we're talking about weight, we're talking about weight gain. So with excess fat, that causes more inflammatory markers or mediators to be produced in the body, and they start producing an inflammatory response. Some of those markers are things like interleukin 6, TNF alpha. TNF alpha has more to do with overweight, and interleukin 6 has more to do with obesity, which then leads to a response in the liver, which the liver also gets inflamed, and you have things like C-reactive protein being produced. Now, these aren't things that are typically checked in blood work, but these are processes that go on. And so when you've got this inflammatory process going on, it's difficult for the cells to respond to that. And that actually leads to problems with weight loss, which can then lead to weight gain. And then there's actually a decrease in an important protein called adiponectin, which is actually anti-inflammatory. It's actually helping to prevent inflammation. But what happens when there's excess fatty tissue in the body is that the level of that protein goes down. And so there's problems with more inflammation going on. And so what are some things that can cause inflammation actually? So there are environmental factors that can cause it, things like poor air quality, poor water quality, so impure drinking water, and we're going to circle back to that. Obesity, like we talked about, can do it. Things like smoking, alcohol. So alcohol and smoking, those are actually toxins that we're putting into our body. Even though alcohol tastes good, it's still sort of a toxin. Too much of it is not good. Chronic stress can do it. Stress has to do with increased production of the hormone cortisol, and there's some other hormones too. But then you get excess belly fat, which is also a problem, and it's a vicious cycle, which leads to more inflammation of the chronic type and problems with weight loss. There are nutrient deficiencies that are also associated with it too, like vitamin B12, vitamin B6, and vitamin D deficiency in studies have been shown to be associated with inflammation. So not having enough of those can be a problem too. And these are things that we can get from the diet or supplementation. Now, to give you an example of how chronic inflammation can be a problem, does anybody remember the movie Erin Brockovich from 2000? And that in that movie, so it was starring Julia Roberts, and she starred as Erin Brockovich, who was a paralegal, and there was a problem with contamination of the groundwater in Hinckley, California. And it turns out that the residents were getting free medical care or just very discounted medical care from the company, so Pacific Gas and Electronic. And it turns out that there was contamination with chromium in the water. And the company had told the residents that, oh, this was not a really bad chromium, but it turned out it was causing problems and people were getting tumors and different kinds of cancers. And so that's one kind of situation that can happen with chronic inflammation, which has actually been associated with things like weight gain, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, other major diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, asthma. These are all things that are associated with chronic inflammation, and just pollution in the environment can lead to chronic inflammation too. So just being human and being out and about in the world, we are exposed to things that can cause chronic inflammation. What can we do about it? That's the big question. So definitely avoiding toxins and living a healthier lifestyle. So there are things that are associated with it too that we can eat that can cause inflammation. So too much sugar is known to be pro-inflammatory. So it's associated with inflammation, which is why too much added sugar in the diet is not recommended. And if you recall, the American Heart Association recommends 9 teaspoons or less maximum sugar per day for the average adult male, and this is everybody, not just diabetics. And for the average female, it's 6 teaspoons of sugar or less per day is the maximum. And we're not trying to get to the maximum every day, but if you kind of look at the sugar in everything that we're eating, a lot of us are getting a lot more than that, more like a quarter cup to half a cup a day, which is way too much and leads to problems with inflammation, which can lead to other problems. And highly processed foods are also associated with chronic inflammation too. So those are things to do less of in the diet. So what should be done more? How is it treated, or how is it prevented? So definitely living a healthy lifestyle. Exercising is useful, and then eating well. So eating lots of fruits and vegetables, things that are more organic, or at least not exposed to lots of chemicals and toxins, because whatever the animal eats or whatever the plant is exposed to, we ingest those things and we get exposed to them too. So less is more. There are some supplements that can help out with inflammation too. Omega-3 is important for being anti-inflammatory, and fish oil does have omega-3. And there are some foods that are associated with less inflammation too, this like ginger, for example. And there's a whole list of those, which is beyond the scope of the talk that we're doing today, but those are just some things that can help. Some other things that are used too are medications that help out with inflammation. And these are, for example, for acute inflammation, but diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, where there's chronic inflammation throughout the body, sometimes that really has to be tamped down in an urgent manner. It can lead to other problems. So steroids are used, but as with anything, a long-term use of steroids is associated with problems of its own. So people are working with their healthcare providers to look at the risks versus benefits. But sometimes people with chronic inflammatory disorders are on long-term medications for it. So what are some foods that can help out with inflammation? As we know, fruits and vegetables, but there are some that are better than others for being anti-inflammatory. So berries are really good. They have antioxidants that are useful, and they also have a substance known as anthocyanins, which are anti-inflammatory too. So all kinds of berries are great. They can help out. Green leafy vegetables are anti-inflammatory too, including those in the diet are beneficial. Fish are the natural source of omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, so getting lots of fish in the diet. Fermented foods tend to be anti-inflammatory too, so things like sauerkraut, kimchi, those are all beneficial. And there's that kombucha kind of fermented drink out there. Olives are anti-inflammatory, and so is green tea. And things like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, those are all useful. So hopefully you've learned something about chronic inflammation and ways to prevent it. So the main thing is just trying to be as healthy as possible, and paying attention to our bodies. Definitely decreasing stress helps with decreasing inflammation. So getting enough sleep, that's also useful. If you are new, I am Dr. Anuligo, and remember, if you want to work more closely with me, definitely send me a direct message and we can talk about that. Thank you for joining me tonight. I will see you guys all next week. Stay safe and stay healthy.